Welcome to an audio special of Planet Possible. We've had a little break and we're back and delighted to be here. I'm your host, Niki Roach, and I'm joined by CIWEM's Director of Policy, Al Chisholm. Welcome, Al.
Hi, Niki. How are you?
I'm good. It's lovely to see you again. We're here just to do a short audio special to talk about a piece of news that certainly happened here in the UK recently. It happened on the 8th of September in the Houses of Parliament, and our brand new Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Ranil Jayawardena, said the following to the House of Commons. The volume of sewage spewed out by water companies is completely unacceptable, and the public have rightly shown their outrage. I told water company CEOs that it is not good enough, and I invited them to write to me formally by the 21st of September with a plan on how they're going to make significant improvements. I have written to the Environment Agency and Ofwat and asked them to use every enforcement power available to them to make sure there is compliance, and I will not hesitate to take further action if I do not see the pace of change that this House expects. So really strong words from our new Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Al. So let's start off by saying, why has this announcement been made?
So Ranil Jayawardena made this announcement, I think, on his second day in the role, about the action that he took on his first day in the role. It's very clearly him wanting to be seen to get to grips, lay the law down with water company bosses from the get-go, really. We've got a new government, we've got a new Secretary of State and ministers, and we've had this summer where the sewage issue just hasn't gone away. If politicians and water companies were hoping that we'd all go off on holiday, just forget about it for a little while, then quite the reverse, because we've had all these beach closures and spills right in peak holiday period, and that's not good for a politician. So clearly coming in, just wanting to get to grips with it very, very quickly and visibly. Whether it changes anything, I think it may not, but let's see what comes back, if indeed we actually get any visibility of what comes back.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, what has been asked of the water companies on this topic so far?
Well, so we had the Environment Act last year, where there was a significant chunk of that piece of legislation was devoted to tackling storm overflows, and a raft of plans were demanded of different parties, including the government itself. Its storm overflows discharge reduction plan, that was published 2-3 weeks ago, and water companies are going to have to produce reports every year saying how they're performing and how they're tackling the problem. The discharge reduction plan set out a £56 billion programme of action, which I think some people feel is ambitious. A great number of others, particularly the campaign groups and public, feel that it's not going far enough, fast enough. And there's a lot of detail baked into that Environment Act around kind of levels of monitoring and reporting that need to be done, and the scrutiny that water companies will come under. A big programme. Campaigners are arguing that actually it doesn't add anything to what was there before. At the moment, we're a little bit in limbo. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes out in water company plans. They are also in the middle of producing their drainage and wastewater management plans, or drainage and sewage management plans, and those are going to be put out for consultation fairly soon. So the detail of what is in all of those, I think, will be mirrored by what's contained in those letters that are sent to the Secretary of State, and that I'm sure water company bosses will discuss with him. And then in the spring, I guess, we'll see these dedicated storm overflow plans, and we'll really get a feel for the pace. But ultimately, we're looking at a long-term programme of action that's not going to get anywhere particularly quickly, because it's a big problem to tackle. Meanwhile, I think people are going to have to deal with some fairly unpleasant conditions.
It feels, to me anyway, that this has become a real political football. Like, I have heard more often than I think I've ever heard in 20 plus years in the sector, this being talked about in the media. If you watch anything that happens in the House of Commons, it feels like the front benches mention water company bosses and storm overflows. Why do you think that is? Is the landscape changing? Is it getting worse? Are we just more aware of it? What's happening there, do you think?
This is a set of circumstances that has gradually built up over years and decades on the watch of pretty much everybody who is kicking that football around. So all of the different political parties, the regulators, the water companies, they have all of them, in some way, shape or form, been involved in the direction and the pace of this problem getting worse. And none of them want to be associated with it, quite understandably, because the data that has come out, the social media coverage, the kind of coverage that is just getting shared on a daily basis now has really, really captured the public imagination. Politicians know that. They know that ultimately they're pretty much on the hook for a lot of this, because it does stem from policy, and it stems from the strength of regulation that those governments oversaw, and they don't want to be associated with it. They all are. They've all got to share it.
Well, you've just set out very clearly there, Al, that nobody wants their fingerprints on this topic, and to a degree everybody has got them on there. So what's going on in the background with all of this?
There's a number of investigations still ongoing that I think will be really, really instructive to the future direction of all of this. And there's different narratives as well. So Emma Howard-Boyd, who's the chair of the Environment Agency, she said in a recent environmental performance report on the water companies that this environmental performance was a decision by water company directors. Those directors are letting this happen. They could choose to stop it happening. And decisions on shareholder dividends and that kind of thing is a decision by water company directors and boards. So the EA are getting really, really outspoken on this. Government, clearly through the new Secretary of State's pronouncements, are getting really outspoken on this. We're seeing Ofwat get really outspoken as well. The Environment Agency and Ofwat are currently conducting an investigation into 2,000 sewage treatment works and the capacity of those, whether or not they've been actually performing to their permitted capacities, and whether they've been declaring to Ofwat that indeed those plants are fit for purpose and appropriately scaled to be able to deliver on the reassurances that Ofwat seek from water companies around their sustainability and their performance levels. We've got an investigation by the Office for Environmental Protection, which is the new post-Brexit independent regulator, into the Environment Agency and Ofwat as to whether or not they have been adequately regulating the sector. So there's all kinds of different people investigating all kinds of other parties, and it's just turning into this big kind of he said, she said, we're looking at you and we're looking at you. And I think it'll be really, really interesting to see how it all plays out. And alongside that, see what the water companies are actually planning to do to tackle it. So I think maybe by the end of the year or into early next year, we'll really have a much more granular feel for not only what is being proposed to be done, but kind of ultimately who's to blame for all of this happening. And of course, this is just stuff that the campaign groups are just going to feed off, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger as an issue, which in turn is going to make it more and more challenging for politicians to manage. So never a dull moment.
And as someone who's kept a really close eye on policy over the last 20 years or so, and the regulatory environment, what's your view on how regulation has changed over that period of time around this topic?
So, the water industry is governed by the Water Industry Act. When privatisation happened, that was the main piece of legislation that was put in place to ensure that water companies conducted themselves, managed their business plans, their investments in a way that would provide their customers with a reliable service and an adequate service, but also protect the environment from pollution. As such, it has been enforced to a greater and lesser degree over the years. But there's been wider policy developments that have contributed to the increasing frequency of these kind of spills. So over the last 30 years since privatisation, we've also seen a lot of urban infill that has meant that we've got a lot more hard surfaces that rainwater runs off. We know that a lot of the content of storm overflow discharges can be rainwater, and that's how they're supposed to work. It just seems that no policy has really considered the impacts on whether or not they're going to exacerbate sewage overflows. And so we've just seen this gradual erosion and lessening of the capacity in the network. No one really pulling water companies up for letting that happen. And suddenly, all of the data comes out. People are awakened to the scale of the problem, and they're mobilised to go out and get coverage of it. And suddenly we've got this massive awakening that's happened over the last 2-3 years of just the scale of this problem. And that's why the politicians are just suddenly running scared from it, really, wanting to be seen either to really challenge the current government on it or to be seen to be the ones who are finally tackling it.
So I know you'll have spoken to SIWEM members who are, many of whom are professionals in this sector. You know, we have an urban drainage group, for example. What are their views on, maybe not this announcement specifically, but the general ramping up of broader interest in the topic?
Let's just start at first principles here. I don't think there's any SIWEM members out there who feel that this is a good situation, and it's not a situation that they would want to see happening. It's definitely something that people have been working to improve. But it's just not been a political priority because there hasn't been this public outcry associated with it. I think people are pleased that it's now getting the recognition that they felt that it should have. But the problem is that the horse has kind of bolted. If we'd got on top of this situation 20 years ago, it wouldn't have become anything like as bad as it has done now. People want to harness the current interest in it to be able to drive forward a whole range of sustainable water management interventions, the likes of working with nature-based solutions, sustainable drainage, even things like smart networks, to really properly make sure that we manage water in the urban environment as well as we possibly can, which again, we've been talking about for a couple of decades and really wanting to see progress on, but it just hasn't landed. Almost relief that finally there's something hefty that can get behind that cause and help push those kind of measures forward. But at the same time, the demand for rapid progress, which is completely understandable, is a little bit of a worry because in those kind of circumstances, there is always the risk that schemes get rushed through. We don't have necessarily the skills base to deliver the range of schemes and the number of schemes at the pace that is being demanded. And so you might end up with suboptimal outcomes. Things are maybe more expensive than they could be. So I think it's a bit of a nuanced question, really. I think there is a little bit of nervousness about being able to deliver against that ambition. But at the same time, yeah, everybody wants to clean up the environment.
I found myself wanting to shout at the telly and phone the occasional radio phone in more recently than I have for a long time, because you feel like I certainly feel like you just want to put that nuance into the conversation and also be able to say that, well, I would imagine almost everybody that works in the sector wants the same things that the public wants. But it's not a switch that can be flicked overnight, and there isn't the cash. Even if water companies were renationalised, there still isn't the money available from bills to be able to do what's needed to do to completely separate, for example, surface water and foul water systems. And that's not necessarily the right answer either. So it's just a bit more nuanced, and I hope as an institution, SIWEM can keep making sure that kind of strong evidence is put out there, I guess, really, so people recognise that.
Yeah, it's a really, really difficult one to balance. And obviously we've got a cost of living crisis at the moment. We've seen that government are willing to throw a lot of money at problems when they get so severe that they have no choice. I think there is a difference between people being able to afford to live across the next couple of winters and unfortunately having sewage free or less sewage spoiled beaches and rivers. I can't see government going in any kind of similar direction on sewage, no matter how loud the cacophony of voices gets. But there's a big discussion over, is 56 billion the right amount of money? Is 2050 the right time horizon? Could we be more ambitious? Could we be bolder? I've had one or two conversations with people in water companies, and I think there is some ambition there, quiet confidence that they could make quicker progress than is being set out by the discharge reduction plan. But that's going to vary company to company. You know, they've got different characteristics in their own sewerage catchments, let alone company to company. So you'll see a varying picture, I think, across the country in terms of how quickly people feel they can go and where they can make the early wins. One way or another, we've got to harness this to make it not just about water companies, to make it about everything we do to manage water, because there's so many different aspects to this that are all contributory factors. It will be a massive wasted opportunity if it's just pointed at water company activity and doesn't feed through into all manner of wider policy that affects how we build and manage our built up places.
Well, that feels like a great point to leave it, really. It's going to be an interesting few weeks. I think you're right, we're probably not going to see a great deal of the contents of those letters for now, but I think we'll keep a watching brief, and if we do find out anything more, then we'll certainly put another audio special together. And that's it for now, and you'll have another episode of Planet Possible out really soon, so don't forget to subscribe on your usual podcast player.